The village of Meyerfen sat at the end of a road that most maps of Veldris did not bother to draw. I had been walking for 6 days when I found the road, and another day and a half before I saw the first lamp in a window burning amber against the slate-gray dusk. My boots were split at the left heel. My cloak was the color of dried mud. I had eaten twice in 3 days, and I did not especially care. I was tracking a wolf pup named Ember who weighed approximately as much as a river stone, and had, apparently, more survival instinct than the entire former council of Veldris, since she had managed to live 3 months in these hills, while every full-grown wolf in my kingdom had chosen to put a mountain range between himself and his alpha king. I could not blame them. I would have done the same. The curse had come in the second hour of the battle at the Grayville Pass, a border skirmish that was supposed to last a morning, and instead lasted 9 days, and left 17 of my men in the ground, and something old and violent lodged in my blood like a splinter I could not reach. The shamans of the Veldris high seat called it a war binding. They said the pass had been sealed by the old pack centuries ago, that there were things buried in the stone there that did not welcome living wolves, and that I had broken the seal when I led my men through at dawn. They said a great many things in the weeks that followed, most of them in the hushed, careful voices people use when they are describing something they cannot fix and do not wish to be blamed for. What it felt like was thunder that lived inside my hands. Not pain exactly, more like pressure, a humming, grinding force that I could feel building behind my knuckles and in the heels of my palms, and that would discharge without warning when the feeling grew too strong. I cracked the throne room floor 3 weeks after the battle when a courier delivered the casualty count. I put a fissure in the stone wall of the War Council chamber the following month, during an argument about the Eastern grain tithe that I had, by any reasonable standard, already won. I woke one night to find my bedpost had shattered at some point while I slept. I moved to the training yard after that, where the ground was packed dirt and at least nothing was irreplaceable. The wolves felt it before I did each time. They would go still, backs raised, and then quietly, carefully, they would put themselves somewhere else. I watched my own pack leave in pieces over the following months, not in defiance, not in fear exactly, but in the slow, steady way a flock of birds will lift from a field at some approaching thing that the human standing beside them cannot yet feel. By winter there were 3 left. By spring there was 1. Ember had been born the previous autumn, the sole pup of a litter that did not survive the cold snap. She was small even for a pup of her age, gray-furred with a rust-colored patch above her left ear that looked, when she tilted her head, almost exactly like a small flame. She had the particular lack of good sense that very small animals sometimes display, which meant she approached me without hesitation when every other wolf in Veldris had learned better. She would sleep against my leg in the training yard. She had, once, attempted to chew through my boot. She was approximately the only living creature left in the kingdom that did not visibly calculate the distance to the nearest exit when I walked into a room. In late summer she disappeared. I searched the keep, then the outer walls, then the lower city. My steward suggested, with the careful neutrality of a man who has learned to phrase things very gently, that she had perhaps wandered off to be with the rest of the pack. What he meant was, even the pup has gone. What he meant was, you are entirely alone now, my king. I started tracking her the next morning. I had a reason to give myself, and it was even partly true. I was responsible for her. She was too small to survive in the hills alone. It was October, and the nights in the Grayville foothills were cold enough to kill a pup that size. But the fuller truth was simpler and less easy to say aloud. She was the last thing in the kingdom that had not flinched from me, and I had tracked her for 6 days through black slate hills and cold river crossings, because I was not ready to lose that too. The road to Meyerfen was a single cart track, rutted from the autumn rains, lined on both sides with low stone walls the color of iron. The village itself was perhaps 40 houses, a market square with a stone well, a mill, and a cluster of small workshops that I could smell from the road. Tallow, cured hides, wood smoke, the sharp green scent of dried herbs bundled for winter. The lamp I had seen from the road was in a cottage set slightly apart from the rest, at the south end of the village, with a kitchen garden that had been put to bed for the season in tidy rows, and a small lean-to against the east wall where someone had stacked a winter's worth of wood. I stood in the road outside the garden gate for a moment, because I could smell Ember. Not just her passing through, not the 3-day-old trail I had been following through the hills, but the warm, settled, specific scent of a small wolf who had been sleeping in the same place for a good while. She was inside that cottage. She had been inside that cottage for some time, which meant someone in that cottage had been feeding my wolf pup for at least 3 months, and had not thought to mention it to anyone. I opened the gate. The latch was a simple iron hook, and it held under my hand without incident. I noticed this the way I had learned to notice everything, cataloging each moment that passed without the pressure building, without the hum behind my knuckles rising towards something I would regret. The garden path was flat stone. The cottage door was heavy oak, unpainted. I raised my hand to knock. The door opened before I touched it. She was not tall. She was not, as far as I could tell in the lamplight from behind her, afraid. She had a still face, not expressionless but composed in the way of someone who has learned to do their thinking quietly. Her hair was dark, pinned back, with a few loose pieces that the kitchen warmth had worked free. She was wearing a wool work dress in a brown so faded it was nearly gray, and she had a cloth in her hands as if she had been drying something. She looked at me. I was the Alpha King of Veldris, which was a title that had meant something once. I was wearing a split-heeled boot, a mud-colored cloak, and 6 days of trail grime. I was fairly certain, the largest person she had encountered on this particular road this week. She said, "You're here for the pup." It was not a question. "Yes," I said. She stepped back from the door. Not far, just enough to indicate that I could come in if I chose to, or stand in the cold if I preferred. She left the choice with me and did not seem especially anxious about which one I made. I came in. The cottage was one large room, warm from a hearth on the north wall that had a good bed of coals going. There were dried herbs hanging from the ceiling beams. I recognized feverwort and pale root, and 2 or 3 others I did not have names for. There was a workbench along the east wall with small pots and a mortar and a row of stoppered glass bottles. There was a narrow bed in the far corner, neatly made. And there, on a folded blanket in front of the hearth, curled into a shape that was mostly just an oval of gray fur with a rust-colored patch, was Ember. She raised her head when I walked in. Her tail moved once slowly, and then she put her head back down. I stood in the middle of the room and looked at her, and felt something loosen in my chest that I had not known was clenched. "She came to the village in late summer," the woman said behind me. "August, I think, the first week. She was limping. She'd caught her right foreleg on something in the hills. I cleaned it and she stayed." A brief pause. I did wonder who she was. "She's mine," I said. "I know," she said. "She has a pack seal in her fur, the Veldris mark under the left ear. I've seen the royal pack seal before. My father traded in the upper city." I turned around. She was back at her workbench, stopering a bottle with the same unhurried competence she seemed to bring to everything. She was not, I noticed, putting any particular distance between herself and the door. She was not, I also noticed, edging toward it. "You've been feeding her for 3 months," I said. "She's a pup," she said. "She was hurt. What would you have me do?" This was also not a question. I looked at her for a moment. I had learned in the past 2 years to read the small signs, the slight widening of the eyes, the careful steadying of the breath, the way a person's feet shifted when the thing in my blood made itself felt. She showed none of them. Either she was extraordinarily controlled, or the curse, which could be sensed by wolves and felt by sensitized pack bond members from 100 yards, was not registering with her at all. "What's your name?" I said. "Senna," she said. "Aldrich," I said. She nodded as if this confirmed something she had already calculated. I know who you are, my king. The seal under her ear is quite clear. She said, my king, the way you say a thing that is simply true, without flourish or fear or particular deference. There's cold broth on the back of the hearth if you haven't eaten recently, which I'd guess you haven't by the look of you. I had not eaten in 2 days. I sat down at her table and ate her broth, which was herb-heavy and good, while Ember slept in front of the fire and Senna worked at her bench with her back to me, grinding something in the mortar with the steady patience of someone who had been doing this for a long time. We did not speak much. There was not, strangely, a great deal of pressure to. The silence in the cottage was a comfortable kind, the sort that happens when two people are simply in the same space, without needing to perform at each other. The pressure behind my hands did not build. I noticed this the way you notice the absence of a sound you had stopped expecting to hear. When I stood to go, Ember raised her head again and whined, a small sound questioning. She'll be fine through the night, Senna said, without turning around. The leg is healed, but she should rest the joint another week before you take her into the hills. I could have argued. I could have pointed out that I was the Alpha King of Veldris, that Ember was my wolf, that I did not take medical instructions from village herb keepers. I said, all right. I slept in the dooryard, wrapped in my cloak against the cold, with my back against the cottage wall. This was not, I told myself, because I wanted to stay near the warm room with the hearth and the quiet woman and the sleeping pup. It was because the night was further gone than it looked, and starting into the hills in the dark with a split boot heel was inadvisable. I came back the next evening, and the one after that. I told myself the second time that I was checking on Ember's leg. This was true. The third time I told myself I was ensuring the pup was eating correctly, which was less convincingly true but still held some water. By the fifth visit I had stopped constructing reasons and simply walked down the road from the hills at dusk, the way water finds a lower level. Because it is what I did now, apparently, and the logic of it would arrive eventually. Senna received me each time with the same unhurried composure. She always had the broth on the back of the hearth. I did not ask her about this, and she did not explain it. I sat at her table and she worked at her bench, and Ember slept in front of the fire, and the pressure in my hands stayed low, and the silence between us was the kind that gathers weight slowly, the way winter gathers in a room long before the first snow falls. She asked me things, when she asked anything at all, with the directness of someone who has decided that the most efficient path between 2 points is the direct one. She asked me, on the third evening, what the war at Greyville Pass had been about. I told her. The eastern border clans had pushed through a pass that treaty held closed. We had gone to push them back. It had gone badly in ways that were difficult to explain to someone who had not been there. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "What did it feel like, the curse?" No one had asked me that. Not my council, not the shamans, not the single remaining steward who had stayed when the others quietly found reasons to be elsewhere. They asked what it did, what it looked like, what the danger was. She asked what it felt like. Thunder, I said, inside my hands. It builds when I feel things strongly. Fear, anger, grief, it discharges. I paused. I've broken a throne room floor, a wall, several things I had reason to value. I looked at my hands on the table. I haven't hurt a person. I should tell you that because you should know it. I know it, she said, without looking up from the mortar. If you'd hurt a person, I wouldn't have let you in the gate. I thought about asking her how she would have stopped me. The answer, obvious, was that she could not have, but I did not think she had meant it as a claim about capability. I thought she had meant, I would have seen it in you and I would not have opened the door to it. There was a difference. I did not say any of this. I sat with the broth and the warm room and the pup asleep at my feet, because Ember had migrated from her blanket to the floor beside my chair somewhere around the third visit, and had apparently decided this was her permanent location. "Does it feel different here?" Senna asked. than it does in the hills. I thought about it honestly. Yes, I said. She did not ask why. She went on grinding. I did not ask why either, which I should have, which I had been careful not to. I knew why in the vague, bone-level way that the blood sometimes knows things before the mind catches up. I had been in and out of pack-bonded spaces for 38 years, and I knew the particular quality of the quiet that happened when something in the wolf blood recognized something it had been waiting for. I had felt it before, faint suggestions, the occasional pull of attention in a crowded great hall, but never like this. Never like a room going still. Never like a sound cutting off in the middle of a note and leaving the kind of silence that is not absence but arrival. I had been telling myself for 2 weeks that it was the cottage, the warmth of it, the herbs, the fire. I was telling myself less and less convincingly. On the 9th evening, I arrived to find her in the garden in the early dark, bringing in the last of the winter roots she'd left too long in the ground. The frost had come 2 nights ago, and the ground was hard. She was working with a short-handled fork, prying each root loose with the methodical patience she brought to everything, and she did not look up when I came through the gate. "There's a pot on the fire," she said. "Don't let it boil." I went inside and did not let it boil. When she came in with her basket of roots, her hands were cold and there was mud on her left knee where she had knelt in the frost-hard soil, and she sat down at the table with the ease of someone genuinely tired, and Ember climbed immediately into her lap, which Ember had been doing since approximately the 4th visit and showed no signs of stopping. Senna put one hand on the pup's back without thinking about it. The rust-colored patch caught the firelight. "My council will come looking for me soon," I said. "Not for my sake, for the kingdom's. There are decisions to be made and I've been absent." "I know," she said. She looked at the fire. "What will you do?" "Go back," I said. "I have to." I paused. "I don't know what to do about the curse. The shaman said 2 years ago that they didn't know if it could be broken. They still don't know." "Does it feel like something that can be broken?" she said. I looked at my hands. "It feels," I said slowly, "less than it did since I've been coming here." I said this carefully because I had been careful about it, careful not to say too much about what I thought I understood. But I was tired of being careful. It had been 2 weeks of careful and I was running low on it. "I don't know what that means," I said, which was the most dishonest thing I had said in a long while. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think you do know what it means. I think you've known for several days. I think you've been waiting to see if I'd notice on my own." I looked at her. "And have you?" "Yes," she said simply. We sat with that for a moment. Ember shifted in her lap, tucked her nose under Senna's hand and went back to sleep. "I don't know what to offer you," I said. "I should say that plainly. My kingdom is reduced to a fraction of what it was. The pack is gone. I have a steward and a remnant council and a curse in my blood that has been quieting for 2 weeks, and I don't know if that's permanent or temporary. I'm not—" I stopped. I started again. "I'm not what a king should be. Right now, I don't know what I will be." "I know what you are right now," she said. "You're the man who's been sitting at my table for 9 evenings and never once let the pot boil." This was not what I had expected her to say. I looked at her. "I'm not asking for certainty," she said. "I'm not asking for a great hall and a ceremony and a pack bowing. I've been alone since my parents died and I'm accustomed to managing. I'm asking—" She stopped. She was not, I realized, accustomed to asking for things. She chose her words the way she chose her remedy quantities, with precision and care. "I'm asking if you'll come back, not just to check on Ember, to come back." "Yes," I said, "I will come back." It was not a vow spoken in a great hall. It was said at a small table in a warm cottage in a village that was not on most maps, with a pup asleep in the lap of a woman with mud on her knee, and it settled into the air between us with the particular weight of something true. I did not stay that night. I went back to the hills, to the cold and the dark and the long walk, and I thought about the pressure in my hands, which had been low for 2 weeks, and was lower now than it had been since the battle at the pass. I thought about the specific quality of the quiet in that room. I thought about 38 years of knowing what the wolf blood meant when it went still, and the particular kind of dishonesty involved in pretending I did not know what it meant when it went still now. My council found me on the 14th day. I had known they would come. My steward, Tomas, was a practical man who had managed the kingdom's affairs through worse winters than this one, and he would give me a reasonable window before concluding that the Alpha King's absence had become a liability. He rode into Meyerfen on a gray horse with 4 council members behind him, and I met him in the village square, which was probably not the reception he had been expecting, but was significantly better than the alternative, which was him arriving at Senna's cottage gate while I was inside eating her broth. Tomas was a lean, gray-haired man with a soldier's posture that had survived 40 years of council chambers, and the particular expression of someone who has rehearsed several speeches and is currently assessing which one applies. "My king," he said. "Tomas," I said. He looked at me with the careful attention of a man reading a document for the second time, looking for something he might have missed. I was wearing a clean shirt. Senna had, without comment, washed the one I'd been traveling in and handed me a spare that had belonged to her father, which fit well enough, and I had, the previous evening, shaved for the first time in 3 weeks. I was still wearing the split boot, but I had mended the heel with a patch from my pack. I looked probably less catastrophic than he had been bracing for. "We've been concerned," he said. "I know," I said. "There were decisions I owed you. I'll come back to the capital in 3 days. I have something to settle here first." He glanced around the village square. I watched him notice the direction from which I had come. He was too careful a man to say what he was thinking, but I knew his face well enough to read it. "There is a woman involved, and you are going to tell me, or not tell me, on your own timeline, and I will behave as if this is all entirely normal." 3 days, he said. "There's the northern tithe and the question of the Border Scouts deployment." 3 days, I said. He nodded. He and the council members found rooms at the village inn, and I went back to the south end of the village. Senna was at her workbench when I came in. She knew from my face that something had shifted. She set down the mortar and turned to face me and waited. "My counsel is here," I said. "I have to go back in 3 days." "I know," she said. "I want you to come with me," I said. "I want that to be a choice you make freely, with full knowledge of what I'm offering and what I'm not. I'm not offering certainty about the curse. I'm not offering a great hall full of wolves bowing. I'm offering—" I stopped. I thought about what I was actually offering. "I'm offering you that I'll come back to this table if you come with me to the capital, that I won't leave you at the edge of things, that whatever I am when the curse is lifted or not lifted, you won't be alone in it." She was quiet for a moment. "You're asking me to trust you," she said. "Yes," I said. "I already do," she said. "I trusted you before you knew I did. That's not a hard question." She turned back to her workbench and began untying the cord on a bundle of dried herbs. "The question is whether you've thought about what you're asking me to walk into. A kingdom in a reduced state, a pack that's gone, a council that will have opinions." "They'll have less opinions than you might think," I said. "There's something they don't know yet that will clarify matters." She glanced at me. "What don't they know?" I crossed the room to the workbench. I stood beside her. In the firelight, which came from the hearth behind us and fell warm and low across the bench and the bundled herbs in her hands, which were still, I could see it clearly, the mark on the inside of her left wrist. It had been there for several days. I had seen it first on the 11th evening, when she had pushed up her sleeve to reach across the bench for a bottle, and I had said nothing because I was waiting to see if she would say something first, and she had not, because she was also, I now understood, waiting to see what I would do. It was the shape of the Veldris wolf seal, rendered in a pale line that was the color of old silver in ordinary light and warm gold in firelight. It was the mate mark of the Alpha King's line. It was the bond, which the shamans had told me 2 years ago, that a cursed king could not form. Apparently the bond had different information. They don't know, I said, that I have a mate. She looked at her wrist. She had been looking at it, I knew, for several days, in the private way you look at something that requires a decision you haven't made yet. Now she looked at me. I didn't know what to do with it, she said. I don't have pack standing. I don't have a title. I've never been inside a great hall. You don't need pack standing, I said. The mark is its own argument. In Veldris, it always has been. The mate bond of the Alpha King's line doesn't care about title. Are you sure it's what you think it is? She said. Yes, I said. I've been sure since the first night. I've been careful about it because I didn't want to overwhelm you with something you didn't ask for, but I've been sure. She looked at the mark again, then she looked at me. Then she did something I had not seen her do in 2 weeks of evenings at her table. She almost smiled. It was not a full smile. It was the beginning of one, the particular shape of a face deciding to stop managing itself so carefully. You've been waiting for me to bring it up, she said. Yes, I said. I've been waiting for you to bring it up, she said. Yes, I said, I know. We considered this mutual miscommunication for a moment. All right, she said. She went back to the herbs. I leaned against the workbench beside her and watched the fire for a while. An ember came and leaned against my leg, and the pressure in my hands was so far below anything that had troubled me in 2 years that I had almost forgotten to listen for it. The following morning, I brought my counsel to the south end of the village. Tomas came on his gray horse, the 4 council members behind him, down the cart track that ran along the south side of the village square to the cottage with the tidy garden and the winter bear beds, and the stack of wood against the east wall. I walked ahead of them. I did not explain where we were going or why. They followed because that was what council members did when the Alpha King walked somewhere with purpose. Senna was in the dooryard. She had been there when I arrived, standing near the gate with her arms folded against the morning cold, wearing a wool cloak the color of pine bark. Ember sat at her feet. Ember looked, as Ember generally did, as though she had opinions about the proceedings. Tomas pulled his horse up at the gate. He looked at Senna. He looked at Ember. He looked at me. Tomas, I said, this is Senna of Meyerfen. There was a brief silence. One of the council members, a man named Harvin who had been on the Veldris Council for longer than I had been king, leaned slightly forward on his horse and looked at her wrist. His expression changed in the way of a man who has just solved an equation that had been troubling him for several minutes. My king, he said in a careful tone, is that? Yes, I said. Tomas dismounted. He had known me for 20 years, which meant he could read the particular quality of my stillness right now, which meant he knew that whatever was happening here was not a request for opinions. He walked to the gate, opened the latch, and stood back. The council members exchanged glances of the kind that convey entire conversations in a single look. My lady, Tomas said to Senna. I'm not a lady, Senna said, with the same level directness she brought to everything. I'm an herb keeper. I've been feeding the king's pup since August. Yes, Tomas said. He was, to his credit, a fast adjuster. Then Miss Senna. He glanced at the mark on her wrist, which was visible where her cloak had fallen back, warm gold in the morning light. Welcome to the service of Veldris. I'm not sure I know what that means yet, she said, but all right. Harvin cleared his throat. He was the oldest member of the council and had survived 3 kings and a regency, and believed strongly in clear statements for the record. My king, he said, do I understand correctly that you are naming this woman your mate before this council? Yes, I said. And the mark is genuine, he said, not quite a question. Yes, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, the shamans told us the curse would prevent the bond. It did not, I said. Another silence. Then Harvin nodded slowly, with the air of a man who has revised a chapter in a book he thought he had finished. Then we'll need to revisit several of the succession assessments, he said. But that can wait until we're back in the capital. It can, I said. Tomas glanced at me. I could see him recalibrating several things at once. The question of the curse, the question of the pack's eventual return, the question of what it meant that the mark had come in, all of it running through his efficient mind in the space of a few seconds. Then he looked at Senna and said, practically, "You'll want a pack. We ride in 2 days." "I know," she said. "I've already started." Which was, I understood, entirely true. She had started before I had even arrived that morning. She had always been 2 steps ahead of the thing I was still working myself up to saying. I did not know why I found this particularly settling, except that I had spent 2 years in a state of managed emergency, and she was the first person I had encountered who moved through the world as if it were not, in fact, an emergency. We rode back to the capital of Veldris on a gray morning 3 days later, Tomas and the council ahead, Senna and I behind them, Ember running alongside on the road and occasionally disappearing into the verge, and reappearing several yards ahead with the exuberant incomprehensibility of wolf pups who have decided that the world is for exploring. Senna had packed everything she owned into 2 bags, which was not much, and she rode without comment and without complaint on a horse that Tomas had procured from the village, watching the countryside pass with the quiet attention she brought to everything. I rode beside her and did not say much, because I had learned in 3 weeks that she and I were well suited to silence and that I did not need to fill it. The capital was 3 days northeast. There were things ahead that I could not fully predict. The question of the curse, which had quieted but not fully resolved. The question of the pack, which had dispersed and might return slowly or might not return for years. The question of a kingdom that had run itself into a reduced state on the strength of a capable steward's management, and would now need to be rebuilt by a king who had, admittedly, been absent in the hills for more than a month. There were also, I had learned, things I had been wrong about. I had believed, since Grayville Pass, that the curse had changed me into something categorically different from what I had been, not just broken, but changed, made into a thing that a mate bond could not attach to, that wolves could not stay near, that the world would need to manage from a careful distance. I had believed this the way you believe a shaman's assessment when you are standing in the ruins of your own throne room floor, with your hands still wringing from the discharge, and 3 of your wolves backing quietly toward the door. The evidence had seemed conclusive. The evidence had been incomplete. What I knew now, what 3 weeks of evenings in a warm cottage had told me, what Ember leaning against my leg had confirmed, what the mark on Senna's wrist had made undeniable, was that the curse had not made me into something without a mate. It had made me into something that a frightened pack could not hold still for. These were different problems. The first was a sentence. The second was a difficulty that could be worked through, given time and the right company and a person willing to sit at a table with you while you both pretended, for as long as necessary, that you were just there to check on the pup. I thought about saying some of this. I looked at Senna, who was watching a hawk turn lazy circles above the ridge line to the east, with the expression of someone taking careful note. I did not say it. I thought that she probably already knew most of it, and the rest could wait until we were at the capital, with a fire going and something on the back of the hearth, and the time to say it properly. The Veldris capital was called Keldenmore, and it was built from the same black granite as the hills around it, so that in winter the city and the land around it were nearly the same color, varying only in the texture of the stone and the warmth of the lamps in the windows. It was a serious city, not unfriendly, but accustomed to hard weather and the particular sobriety of a people who had spent several hundred years negotiating with the northern cold. The main road into the city was wide enough for 4 horses abreast, and the gates were standing open when we rode in. There were people in the street. Not a crowd, not a gathering that had been announced, but the ordinary mid-morning movement of a city, people going about the work of the day, and they stopped when they saw the council riding in, and they stopped again when they saw me, and they looked with the various expressions of people who have been waiting for something without quite believing it would arrive. I had been gone for more than a month. The last they had seen me, I had been a king who could not be trusted near irreplaceable stonework. What they were seeing now was, I was not entirely sure what they were seeing. A king returning. A king who looked, possibly, slightly better than the king who had left. And behind me, on a bay horse with one hand steady on the reins and the other resting in her lap where the edge of her cloak had fallen back, her wrist visible in the morning light. The mate mark of the Alpha King's line, warm gold against her skin, unmistakable to anyone who knew what it meant. There were people in Keldenmore who knew what it meant. I could see them, in the crowd at the street edge, the ones who looked first at her wrist and then at me, and then back at her wrist with the expression of people recalculating something fundamental. We rode through the city without stopping, up the main road to the keep. The keep gates were open. The steward's staff was assembled in the outer yard, the household that Tomas had maintained through the months of my absence, the people who had kept the capital running while the king was in the hills arguing with himself about whether he knew what he knew. They looked at Senna. One of the kitchen women, a stout, sharp-eyed woman named Berta who had worked in the keep for 30 years, and did not, in 30 years, appear to have been surprised by anything, looked at her wrist, looked at me, and folded her hands in front of her with the air of someone who has just correctly predicted the outcome of a complicated wager. "Welcome home, my king," she said. "Berta," I said. "And welcome," she said to Senna, to Keldenmore. Senna dismounted and looked at the keep, the black granite walls, the high tower, the great doors, with the same steady, cataloguing attention she had brought to everything else. Then she looked at me. "It's larger than I expected," she said. "It is," I said. "Is the kitchen well stocked?" she said. "I believe so," I said. "Tomas is thorough." She nodded, apparently satisfied, and turned to follow Berta toward the main doors. Ember trotted at her heel. I stood in the yard for a moment, watching them go, and felt the particular quality of the quiet that lives inside the chest when a thing that has been uncertain for a very long time has finally resolved. The curse did not break in a day. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easy to say that the mate bond sealed and the thunder in my hands went silent and everything went back to the way it had been before Grayville Pass, and it did not happen that way. What happened was slower and more like a winter thawing day by day, the pressure lower, the gaps between discharges longer, the ringing behind my knuckles quieter until 6 weeks after we returned to Keldenmore. I put my hand against the practice yard wall and felt only wall. No hum. No building charge. Only stone, cold and solid and ordinary under my palm. I stood there for a long moment, hand against the wall, and did not feel anything extraordinary, which was itself, I thought, one of the more extraordinary things I had ever felt. The pack came back slowly, in the way that dispersed things return when the reason they left has changed. First Ember, obviously, who had never actually counted herself as dispersed. Then 2 of the older wolves in the early weeks, approaching the keep cautiously, and then deciding it was acceptable. Then others in 1s and 2s over the following months. Not all of them, some had bonded elsewhere, found new territory, made new arrangements, and that was what it was. But enough for a pack. The council, which had been running on Tomas's practical authority for months, returned to full function quickly. There were, as Harvin had predicted, succession documents to revise. There were, as Tomas had predicted, northern tithes to settle and border scout deployments to confirm, and approximately 47 other things requiring decisions that had been waiting for a king who could be trusted not to crack the floor of the council chamber. I attended to them. I was steady, the floor remained intact. Senna did not move through Keldenmore the way I might have expected, which is to say, she did not move through it as a woman discovering a great hall for the first time, and adjusting herself to it. She moved through it the way she moved through everything, unhurriedly, taking careful note, making herself useful in the specific ways that interested her, and declining to perform usefulness in the ways that did not. She found the keep's herb stores within the first week and reorganized them, which Berta told me, with a tone of deep personal approval, was long overdue. She set up a workbench in the south-facing room on the second floor, which got the best morning light. She began, quietly, treating the minor ailments of the household staff, and then the ailments of the people in the lower city, who had previously made the long walk to a healer 4 streets over. She did this without announcement and without ceremony, the same way she had fed a wolf pup in a cottage at the end of an unmapped road. I asked her once in the evenings. We had found our evenings again, the same quality of quiet we had had in the cottage, now in the south-facing room with the good fire and her work on the bench and ember on the floor, whether it was enough, whether Keldenmore was what she had expected, whether the life she had landed in by virtue of a pup with a lame leg and a king who could not leave well enough alone was the life she wanted. She considered the question with her characteristic precision. Then she said, "I didn't have specific expectations. I had a cottage and a garden and work I was good at, and those things were enough until they weren't. Now I have a larger kitchen which is an improvement and work I'm good at and," she paused, "and you, which is what I didn't know I was missing because I'd never had it to miss." I said, "That may be the most efficient declaration I've ever heard." She said, "I don't see the point in decorating it." I said, "No, neither do I." There was no ceremony. We had discussed it and concluded jointly that neither of us wanted one Senna because she had, by her own account, no particular interest in standing in a great hall having things announced at her, and I because the last ceremony I had overseen had been the council naming me cursed beyond remedy, and I was content to let that be the last great hall ceremony of that particular chapter. The bond was named in the mate mark. The council had seen it. The keep knew it. The people of Keldenmore knew it, in the way cities know things, not from an announcement but from the accumulated observations of 30 years' worth of people who had watched kings and their business and drawn their own conclusions. What they observed, I think, was this, that the Alpha King of Veldris came back from the hills less broken than he had left, that he came back with an herb keeper from Meyerfen who did not act like a woman who expected things of the world and a wolf pup who slept at the herb keeper's feet, that the curse, which the shamans had said could not be broken, appeared to have been broken, that the pack was returning, that the king, who had been striking the walls of things involuntarily for 2 years, had apparently stopped doing that. What they did not observe, because it happened in a south-facing room with a good fire and a workbench and no audience, was the specific moment it became clear to me that the mark on Senna's wrist, which I had been watching in firelight for weeks, was the same warmth as the silence in my hands, that the thing the curse had broken was not the bond, had never been the bond, but only my ability to believe the bond was still possible, that she had not healed me. You cannot heal another person. But she had been willing to sit at a table with someone who was not yet whole, without requiring him to be whole first, and that was not nothing. That was, in fact, the specific and non-transferable thing I had needed and had not known how to ask for. I said this to her once. She listened to the whole of it and then said, "You did the same for me." I said, "I don't know what I did for you." She said, "You kept coming back. After the first night when you could have taken the pup and gone, you kept coming back. That's not nothing either." And it was not. It was the same thing, seen from the other side of the table. 2 people who had each, separately, concluded that they were fine on their own and would continue to be fine on their own, discovering in the evenings of a warm room and a sleeping pup that fine was a smaller word than they had believed, and that what they had each been doing was not fine but merely sufficient, and that there was a significant distance between the two. The mate mark was warm gold in the afternoon light that fell through the south-facing window. It had been warm gold for months now, and I thought it would be for a long time after, the color of a thing that has decided what it is, and settled into it without fuss. Ember was asleep on the floor, the fire was good, Senna was at her bench. She had always been the answer to a question I hadn't known how to ask.